40, what you want me to do with this nigga? I got this nigga Biggie, and what you wanna do with him?
They call him the ambassador of the Bay, the voice that turns slang into power and hustle into legacy. E-40 isn't just a rapper, he's an institution. But behind the charm and million-dollar smile lies a history built on tension, loyalty, and revenge. Because even the most respected king has enemies, and some of them learned the hard way that in the Bay, respect isn't given, it's earned. These are the 7 artists E-40 hated the most. Stories of betrayal, rivalry, and redemption that prove even legends have limits. First on the list is the notorious B.I.G. And this story is the reason E-40's name will forever be linked to one of the most dangerous near misses in hip-hop history. It was the mid-90s, the height of the East Coast versus West Coast tension. Rappers were picking sides, magazines were fanning flames, and every interview quote could light a new match. Biggie Smalls was at the top of the world then, New York's golden child, the face of Bad Boy Records, and the biggest voice on the East Coast. E-40, meanwhile, was holding down the Bay Area, a region that had always felt overshadowed by Los Angeles and often ignored by the industry. He was respected locally, but he was still fighting to make the wider world understand that the Bay had its own sound, slang, and soul. So when Biggie sat down for an interview with a Canadian magazine and was asked to rate a few West Coast rappers, including E-40, nobody expected what came next. When he gave E-40 a 0, it sent shockwaves through California.
And from a scale from 1 to 10, you know what that man gave me? A 0, bro.
To some, it was a throwaway comment from a confident artist. But to many in the Bay, it felt like an insult carved in stone. Disrespect aimed not just at a man, but at a movement. E-40 had spent years putting his city on the map, carrying Vallejo on his back, and that one number threatened to erase all of it. Rumors spread fast in that pre-social media world, traveling by word of mouth and radio chatter. By the time Biggie arrived in Northern California for a scheduled appearance, that 0 had become a warning sign. People in Vallejo were angry, protective, and ready to make a statement.
40, what you want me to do with this nigga? I got this nigga Biggie, and what you want us to do with him?
There were whispers that some wanted to confront Biggie directly, to remind him that words had consequences. And this is where E-40 showed what real leadership looks like. Late one night, he got a call telling him Biggie was in the area, that the energy on the ground was bad, and that things could spiral out of control. That was the moment when pride could have led to something irreversible. Instead, E-40 took a breath, grabbed the phone, and reached out himself. He made contact with Biggie, talked to him directly, and let him know he would be protected. He made it clear to his people that no harm was to come to the visiting artist. He said something that rubbed folks wrong, E-40 later explained. It wasn't a reason to hurt or make a man disappear.
That hurt it, but you know what I'm saying? Not to just, make this man disappear.
That single decision changed everything. Biggie finished his trip safely, went home, and, in a gesture that shocked many, gave E-40 a shout-out in the liner notes of his posthumous album, Life After Death. It was a small line, but it spoke volumes, proof that mutual respect had replaced misunderstanding. In a decade defined by violence and ego, E-40's choice to protect instead of punish turned potential tragedy into a lesson. He proved that real power isn't measured by who you can destroy, but by what you can prevent. In that moment, the ambassador of the Bay reminded everyone that control, over pride, over anger, over ego, is the strongest weapon a man can carry. In second place is Mac Dre. And this is where the idea of hate gets completely flipped. Mac Dre was not just a rapper, he was a movement. His charisma, his style, his imprint on hyphy culture made him larger than life in the Bay. He and E-40 existed as twin forces, different aesthetics, different circles, same regions, same stakes.
To that, Mac Dre was making noise in Vallejo.
Because of that, there were always conversations, always comparisons. Who really ran Vallejo? Who had the streets? Who had the culture? Fans and local voices fed into it, turning artistic differences into supposed tension. Lines got drawn that neither man had necessarily asked for. People love picking sides, and in doing so, they helped build this quiet wall between two giants. The tragedy is that the story never got a real resolution. In 2004, Mac Dre was killed out of state.
Well, then in 2004, Mac Dre gets killed in Kansas City.
Just like that, the door closed on any chance of a full conversation, a public collaboration, a moment where both could sit down and laugh at everything the streets had tried to project onto them. In later interviews, E-40 spoke on Mac Dre with a tone that said everything. He He called him a legend. He acknowledged that misunderstandings and distance had existed. He also expressed regret that they never bridged that gap while there was still time. And that is the key. Whatever people thought in the moment, whatever small fractures may have existed, there was no deep-seated hatred left to hold on to, just the weight of what never happened. Mac Dre's death forced the Bay to confront its divisions. It showed how fast things can end, how pointless pride can be when tomorrow is never promised. For E-40, it became a lifelong reminder to value clarity over confusion, unity over ego, and to say your respect out loud before it is too late. Number 3 brings us to Too Short, a name forever tied to Oakland and one of the first rappers to kick open the door for the Bay. When you say E-40 and Too Short in the same breath, you are talking about pillars, but even pillars cast shadows, and for a time, people were convinced there was something brewing between them. In the late 90s, Too Short spent significant time in Atlanta, exploring new sounds, new opportunities. Back home, E-40 was still fully rooted in the Bay, dropping music, developing artists, representing Vallejo non-stop. That split in geography became the seed for speculation. People wondered who really carried the coast during that stretch, who kept the light on, who deserved the title of the one who held it down. A radio station even tried to make them enemies.
I'm like, wasn't me? He's like, all right, hang up phone. And then however circle back and start coming out about the call.
But this is where their story dodges the usual script. Instead of blowing up, it evolved. As the years went on, E-40 and Too Short worked together and have done dozens of songs since then.
Dozens of songs since then. And it was almost like he could have took that bait.
They showed up on records, shared stages, and gradually made it impossible to push the idea that they were enemies. Then came the defining moment, their Versus event in December 2020. 2 lowriders, a stage dressed like Bay Area history, a track list full of anthems. Instead of tension, there was nothing but laughs, stories, and mutual admiration. They saluted each other, saluted the Bay, and put on a masterclass in how to age with grace in hip-hop. Any whispers of hate were buried that night under decades of impact and a very loud message. There is room for more than one legend. For E-40, this chapter stands as proof that sometimes people want a feud where there is really just a misunderstanding or competitive comparison. Instead of feeding it, he let time, collaboration, and celebration erase it.
It was terrible. So E-40, who I give all the credit to, was like, man, we got to turn this negative into a positive.
At number 4, we have Yukmouth, one of the voices who helped define Oakland's presence in hip-hop. As one half of Luna's, his legacy is stamped, and with that legacy came a sharp tongue and a fearless approach to calling things how he saw them. Meanwhile, E-40 was amplifying his own empire, evolving from Vallejo street hero to full-blown Bay Area institution. This is where perception and reality started to blur. Over time, Yukmouth made comments suggesting E-40 had changed, that he was acting superior, that he was not always showing the same love he received. In a region where respect is currency, those kind of suggestions carry weight. Fans and media began framing it as an Oakland versus Vallejo thing. Whispers turned into debates. Suddenly, there was the idea that E-40 was Hollywood, while others were still in the trenches. It did not explode into a headline-grabbing war, but it simmered. People read between lines on records. They replayed interviews. They tried to decode looks, gestures, mentions, and yet, through it all, E-40 stayed in his usual lane, focused, composed, more concerned with his grind than with back-and-forth shots. When he did address it years later, he brushed it off as energy that did not deserve to be fed and emphasized that his love for the Bay was not limited to one block or one name. This tension was bigger than just 2 artists. It reflected the constant struggle for recognition in an area that has always felt overlooked. Everyone wanted credit. Everyone wanted their city held up as the one. Sometimes that spills into frustration, aimed at whoever seems to be winning the most. E-40 became a lightning rod for those feelings. But as time moved, the conversation softened. Both men continued their paths. The so-called beef became more of a snapshot than a scar. It is a reminder that not all talk turns into real hate. Sometimes it is simply pressure, pride, and perspective colliding in a small space. If this was the story of unspoken tension, the next one is about 2 kings who proved that whatever might have been in the air, unity makes a better legacy than rivalry. Number 5 is Richie Rich. And this cut differently because it came from inside the circle. Richie Rich is not just some random name in the Bay. He is an Oakland staple, someone who always carried weight and credibility. For years, there was mutual respect between him and E-40. That is exactly why, when confusion and tension flared up in 2020, people stopped and paid attention. It started with lighthearted content tied to football loyalty, posts and images playing on E-40's visible love for Bay Area teams. It should have stayed playful. Instead, somewhere in the mix, E-40 called Richie Rich a snitch.
And then under that post, he was like, "Oh, you snitch ass."
In that world, that word is not entertainment. It is serious. It questions integrity, history, and everything a man stands on. Richie Rich made it clear that if anyone was going to attach that label to him, they better come with proof.
And what I tell people is, present some paperwork. I've been in the game my whole life.
He defended his name publicly, firmly. The conversation escalated. Blogs picked it up. Suddenly, there was a narrative forming that these two legends were on opposite sides of a very ugly line. Then came the turning point.
And like I said, I want to apologize to you, good brother. You know what I'm saying?
E-40 spoke publicly and apologized. He explained that the word should not have been used, that it was not how he operates, that it was wrong. He addressed the streets and addressed Richie Rich directly, confirming the love and respect was still there. Richie Rich responded in kind. The hostility diffused. The friendship stood. That moment traveled fast, not because of the drama, but because of the resolution. Two established names choosing to correct the record instead of feeding a bigger fire. It showed younger artists something crucial. You can be wrong, you can own it, and you can repair what matters. A single word almost cracked something sacred, but humility stitched it back together. If this was a lesson in accountability, the next chapter is a reflection of how pride and territory can shape a narrative, even without a single direct bar exchanged. In sixth place is Messy Marv. There was no rumor mill quietly spinning in back rooms. This was frustration turned into spectacle. Around 2010 and 2011, Messy Marv began to vent publicly that the Bay Area wasn't giving him the shine he deserved. In his eyes, there was a gatekeeper at the top of the ladder, E-40, and that gatekeeper was keeping the door closed. What started as vague complaints quickly sharpened into accusations. He claimed E-40 used his influence, his connections, even his friendships with DJs and promoters to make sure Marv never broke through the ceiling. He turned that belief into a campaign, dropping interviews and songs that painted E-40 as the villain of Bay Area rap. Projects like Class of '84 and Playboy Gangsta were laced with thinly veiled shots, calling out E-40's character, mocking his age, and suggesting that his success came at the expense of others. It was strategic too, because if you go after a giant, people talk. Every new insult bought Messy Marv another headline, another interview, another day of relevance. E-40's reaction couldn't have been more different. There was no diss track, no frantic defense, no angry social media rants. Instead, he addressed the issue without ever saying Marv's name. In interviews, he spoke about jealous locals and folks who can't stomach another man's success. He used calm, deliberate language that turned the spotlight back on professionalism instead of chaos. That restraint said more than any response record ever could. Hip-hop media covered every update, replaying Marv's taunts, dissecting E-40's silence. On message boards, fans argued over whether Marv was exposing an uncomfortable truth or simply projecting his frustrations. Some sympathized, saying the Bay needed more space for upcoming voices. Others saw his campaign as bitterness disguised as bravery. Through it all, E-40 kept releasing albums, investing in businesses, and quietly proving that consistency beats controversy every time. Months turned into years, and the noise eventually faded. The alleged blackballing never found proof, and Messy Marv's career didn't transform the way he hoped. The story became less about injustice, and more about how quickly rage can burn itself out when the other side refuses to feed the fire. Looking back, the contrast is striking. One man was swinging at shadows. The other was too busy building an empire to notice. E-40 didn't panic. He didn't beg the internet to see his side. He didn't weaponize his power in return. He let his catalog, his reputation, and time itself be his defense. If someone tried to cast him as the villain, he trusted that the truth would surface eventually. The whole episode was loud, bitter, and emotional, but it didn't break him. It only highlighted the difference between a name built on impulse and one built on discipline, between a moment of anger and a lifetime of achievement. And if that was a storm E-40 chose to outlast, the next story shows that even loyalty, even friendship, can be shaken by a single misunderstood word. Finally, at the bottom is the game. It was the mid-2000s, and the game was fresh off the documentary, one of the biggest West Coast albums of its era. He was young, explosive, and obsessed with drawing lines, deciding who was real, who was fake, and who had fallen off. That fire made him magnetic, but it also put targets on his back, and some of those targets were the same pioneers who built the path he was walking. The tension with E-40 came from that same restless energy, the attitude that the new generation was ready to replace the old. Even when the game didn't name names, everyone could hear the undertone. In a culture where respect for elders is sacred, those jabs felt like disrespect. E-40 had already survived more than a decade in the game, adapting through every era, switching flows, and staying relevant while entire movements came and went. So when a younger artist from his own coast began acting like the OGs were outdated, it landed like a slap to everything he had built. E-40 handled it in his usual way, with composure. He didn't rush to the studio to drop a diss record or chase headlines. He addressed it through conversation and subtle reminders, calmly pointing out that the very road these new stars were speeding on had been paved by people like him, Too Hort, Ice Cube, and the pioneers who kept West Coast hip-hop alive when the spotlight was elsewhere. His tone stayed sharp, but never bitter. It was a quiet warning disguised as wisdom. Respect your elders. For a while, the tension hovered over the scene like fog. Fans picked sides, the internet dissected lyrics, and blogs speculated about hidden shots and freestyles. But as the years rolled on, the fire cooled. The game continued carving his legacy. E-40 kept stacking albums, investments, and influence. They began sharing the same stages, exchanging respect instead of shade. Whatever rivalry once existed dissolved into a generational handshake. One star learning humility, the other reminding everyone what endurance really looks like. In the end, E-40 didn't need to bury the game to prove his relevance. He just had to stand his ground long enough for time to do the talking. What started as a symbolic clash turned into mutual recognition. The young gun realized the crown he was chasing had been forged by the same hands he once tried to challenge. Looking at this countdown, something becomes clear. On the surface, it is top 7 artists E-40 hated the most. Underneath, it is a map of how he navigated ego, accusations, misunderstandings, territorial pride, and generational pressure without letting it destroy him. E-40's legacy is not defined by how many enemies he crushed. It is defined by how many storms he outlasted and how many times he showed that strength is not always about striking back. Sometimes it is about walking away, sometimes it is about making a call, sometimes it is about saying "my bad," and sometimes it is about letting history speak for you. So, which of these stories changed the way you see E-40? Which moment do you think the culture misunderstood the most? Drop your thoughts below, because if this list proves anything, it is that behind every headline about hate, there is usually a deeper story about survival, respect, legacy, and what it really takes to last in this game.